Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of From. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously we're picking up in the aftermath of the episode. Obviously we had Tabitha and Julie being with Kenny and the father, the priest, and I think home dude, the dude who's on drugs, like he gave his name last night. In the last episode, I'm blanking on it now. But him and all of them making it to Donna's place, which they weren't 100% welcome because it's like, nope, we're not going to let them in. Even though Fatima's like, no, like Ellis is out there, like, let them in. It's like, no, you know the rules, which Donna had to come down and be like, no, let them in. Like, it's like, you said to never open this door. Now, my thought was, like, is it because you don't know if they're actually, like, well, because you see the people, so it's not like they're one of these things. Like, because it seems like, as we learn in this episode, there are characteristics to recognize when it's one of those things and when it's not. But part of me wonders, it's like, no, we don't want to take the chance that the moment we open the door, they come in here. But also, the fact is that we leave an opportunity for those things to, like, really get close enough to us to talk to. So maybe that's the fear of it. Whatever the case may be. Luckily, everyone gets inside, but then, like, Julie and Tabitha have to be tied up, and I'm like, what's that about? I was like, and when it's like, oh, get on the floor at first, I'm like, oh, is this some like ritual or something to prove that they're not what they're... It's like, no. Donna, the way she explains it later on is like, people freak out. Like, you never know how people are going to react that first time. So it's like, you need them restrained so that you can properly take the time to explain everything to them. Because while they're getting the explanation about how things are, so is Jim inside of the RV. So explaining, we got an answer about the talismans. They don't know anything. I'm like, that's fascinating. I thought like someone came up with it, like maybe someone had some knowledge. It's like, no, they just know the talismans work. I'm like, so from what we know timeline wise, so far it seems like Donna might be one of the veteran people here because she said her sister got killed 3 years ago, 3 years, 6 months, and 17 days ago. I was curious like how far back this was going to go. Like, it makes you wonder, like, because Donna talked about the fact is that, like, I wonder, is she the senior member? Anyone that's still alive in town, is she the one that's been there the longest? Because based on the conversation, it seems like only one person ever comes into the town at once. So for the car crash to happen is actually pretty something special because it's like, yeah, we never have two cars at once. It's usually like one group of people at a time. So obviously something's different. Something's got to be special about for this to happen when it's never happened before. That makes me wonder too, like, anyone who's been here long enough, like, is Donna the only one from her original, like, from that time frame of 3 years ago? Like, were the people here already who've been like, oh, I've been here 2 years before Donna, and they ended up dying? Like, I'm curious about the time frame of, like, is she the person that's been here the longest? It seems like it, considering she has some seniority and she has her own little place to kind of do whatever she wants to. Which it seems like that kind of comes in conflict with the rest of the town, those who aren't a part of like Donna's little hub and stuff. I don't know why that divide exists the way it does, but nevertheless, like I said, some of the interesting explanations, like Donna going into about like, I know you're going to think it sounds crazy, but it's like, you're actually lucky, Tabitha, you showed up when you did. There was actually some sunlight left. When me and my sister finally got here after seeing that damn tree, it's like, yep, everyone sees the trees and those damn crows. It's like, yeah, if it wasn't for because of that, they ended up coming into town at night, and you're like, damn, that sucks. They didn't even have time to prepare or anything like that. Who knows how many people were actually in the town at the time? But she was saying back then they didn't have the system that they have. But like, cool, stay indoors, like the talismans. It's like, no, back then you had to find a bush and hide and basically hope and pray that no one comes out. Because being indoors doesn't matter. Like, it's not like a straight up vampire thing of like, oh, like they have to be invited in like just naturally. It's like, no, the talismans are the only thing. And it seems like the talismans have to be hanging to like, I guess specifically they have to be hanging on a door. If they're on the ground, it doesn't have the protection, which is so weird. You would think it just being in the vicinity, but I guess it has to be held up and near a doorway because I guess it doesn't affect the entire... I don't know, because in other... I guess it like has a certain range. So like if you block the only main entrance, as long as it... I don't know, because that's what I'm like, why is it being like on the ground, not unless there was something else to it, like that talisman later on was like scarred up so it lost its power because the symbols were messed with. I don't know. There's still so many questions that need to be answered about how that all works. But it was still inside, it seemed like. So you would think that would have been enough later on to help stop them, but apparently not. It's like, if it's not hanging up, because even in that I mean, to be fair, in Christy's dream, she saw, or her nightmare, she saw Jim grab it, and she's like, Jim, no, and the monsters were able to bust in then. So it's like it does seem like it leans into it has to be specifically held up. But I guess, like, the block door radius is like a certain, because I guess maybe the moment it's held up, it puts a barrier around every door or whatever, but the moment it's knocked down, it loses whatever power it had. That's my current thought process. Once again, just having watched just this episode, maybe, and episode 3, there's a better, even more explanation about all of that, but still. It's interesting to also know, we learned that these things love to go slow, because Kenny's like, yeah, you ever notice how these things walk and don't run? And Boyd's like, yeah. It's like, yeah, because these things don't feel the need to, because, and I love the analogy he made where, like, anytime he played chess with his dad, he'd always, when he got down to his last piece, he'd always move it between the last 3 spots trying to avoid him. And he's like, Sheriff, well, we're running out of spaces on the board, because those things are like, they don't have to run after us. They can take their sweet time, because it's like, yeah, you're not going anywhere. We got you trapped. Like, where are you going to go? Leave the town? You can't. There's only so much protection going around, so we'll get you. Get inside your head in one way or another, and we will get you. So I just think that's just a fascinating element. But circling back, it's like, the fact is that Donna talked about with her sister's death, like, first and foremost, straight up ripped her face off and then proceeded just to kind of rip her apart. So it's like, I guess they go for, because once again, we see with certain kills, like Lauren and Megan last episode, ripped open their chest cavity. Well, not just their chest, it looked like their entire stomachs. Their rib cage was ripped open. So it seemed like they scooped out the organs, but it seems like other times, I guess that was just like, oh, we're having our fun, so we're ripping, because she was saying, like, no, they're torturing her, so they started with the skin, and then eventually probably made their way to their organs. That's, like, their main shtick, their main thing, I guess. Maybe they choose specific body parts from people that they want to eat, or maybe it's just, like, all, like, organs are on, are up for grabs, essentially. But she was like, yeah, I remember, she's like, even all these years later, I can still hear my sister screaming, because they wanted to play with her. They enjoy the hunt. They enjoyed playing with us. Like, it's a game to them. So they kill us slowly. I was like, these things are brutal. Not only, like, what they leave behind and just, like, how devastating that is. It's like, once again, this is like some, like, because walkers from The Walking Dead will rip you to pieces. So it's like, it's very similar in that regard of just, like, what's left. I guess truth be told, there's a lot of monsters will rip you to pieces. It's not just like a zombie thing, but still. Obviously, last episode, they confirmed that the RV situation, they weren't 100% sure, like Boyd or Chrissy weren't sure if it was going to work. They were guessing, because it's never been done before, but now it's been proven it can be done. I'm sure everyone's going to be like, who cares? I'm still not going to do it. Like, cause that's too much limited space. So you obviously want a house, but it's like, right, if the situation calls for it, we can, I guess that's in case anyone ever gets out there in the woods and they have their stone with them, which I don't think anyone's going to be in that situation. But I guess if they had one of those talismans with them, they could end up chilling in that RV. Still not the best idea, obviously, but still. I thought it was kind of interesting, Fatma, when she showed Julie, like, hey, I want to show you that this can be a dream and not just a nightmare. It's like, yeah, you can see that in just the first episode alone, the way everyone's like, oh, hey, Sheriff, and just living their everyday life. People are trying to find some form of normalcy, because if you don't, you're going to drive yourself insane. Because it's like, yeah, because I even love that Christy was like, oh, what do you do, Jim? And Jim was like, oh, I make rides at amusement parks and stuff like that. I'm an engineer, I make rides at amusement park. And she's like, huh. And he's like, what? No, it's just funny. You talked like that was present tense. And Boyd was like, hey. Because it's like, for her, it's funny because it's like, oh, you lose that pretty quickly. It's like, oh, that's what I was. Like, there kind of isn't like, oh, like, we're talking as, he's like, because Jim's talking as if he'll be able to go back to his life. And for Chrissy, it's just a thing of like, oh, no, we've all kind of accepted that it's like, there is no escaping here. Like, once again, Donna's been here for like 3 years and there's been no changes. Once again, maybe Jim and his family in the other car might be it seems like that's the first time like things have been different. The question is why? What makes this circumstance different? Maybe it has something to do with Ethan. Maybe he's special. Especially that whole thing where he was like, oh, I see these drawings and stuff like that. And then we see that kind of creepy dude, Victor, has got like a whole bunch of paintings. So you're like, did Ethan tap into something? Like, is he special? Like, I was like, what was that? What was that about? Like, he saw the drawings and he's like, oh, everyone was screaming and the spider came down from the ceiling. I'm like, what are you talking about, kid? I'm like, that's some creepy stuff of like, cool, kid, cool, Ethan. That's not creepy as hell. So I don't know what to really expect from that. But we do get that stinger at the end where he sees another little boy and you're like, okay, so do they choose people to kind of take advantage of? Is it because like people are in a state because I guess kids are potentially the ones that are the easiest to manipulate, as well as those who are just completely psychologically broken, like Sarah. Because I'm like, why are you doing all this? I don't get it. Like, that's why I was like, is it for a sacrifice? To an extent, yes. She killed home dude because I was like, the moment she started talking to herself, I'm like, are they talking to you? And you're just going along with it? It's like, she talked to her brother later on, and it's like, yeah, I did it because they promised me if I did this, they would let us go. Like, so she's like, I had to make it seem like it was monsters. So she left the door open. It's like, you didn't just kill one person. You directly killed one person. You indirectly, still directly, killed 2 other people. That's super jacked up. But it's like, who knows how long she's been here, and she's probably just like, they got in my head. And so I don't know whether like she's predisposed to like be swept up in those voices, or I guess once again it's like maybe they picked the person that are like, oh, you're vulnerable enough for us to get to, just like Ethan, or maybe because he's special. Because the thing is, because Ethan is seeing that broad daylight, and whatever it is, Julie can't see. So it's like, what the hell is that about? Is it because of, like, he was kind of in that in-between space between that waking and dream space when he was kind of in and out after, like, you know, Chrissy's helping with it, like, his leg and everything? Is it because, like, if it affects you during daytime, so does that mean, like, same thing happened to Sarah? Like, what's going on there? Because it seemed like she was a little off before she went in. I mean, she already was kind of like, after her brother left, it seemed like she was already kind of moving into action, so she already, because when she killed home dude, it was still, I don't think it was nighttime yet, was it? I don't remember now. I don't remember if it was nighttime when she killed home dude. If it wasn't, like, they can, obviously, it seems like they can still affect you during the day, so maybe the rules are changing, that maybe those things are just getting so much more powerful that nighttime isn't, as slowly but surely is getting to the point that even the day won't be able to protect you. Maybe that's kind of where we're going with that. I don't know. You could tell immediately by that kind of cold opening that, like, my money was like, oh, it's going to be Christy, isn't it? I don't know why. It didn't even cross my mind at the beginning, because immediately in my mind I was like, oh, it's going to be Christy. Because it's like, right, of course it's going to be the girl that you like and you've just never confessed your feelings to. Like, of course it's going to be that situation. Didn't even cross my mind until, like, partway through the episode. I'm like, there's always a thing with his dad, especially because the way Kenny was talking about his dad so much about, right, he talked about the story about basically how they got here in the first place, because he's like, my dad used to kind of force me to play chess all the time, and he's like, I used to hate it. And then, like, he talked about his dad's condition, and even the whole thing of, like, him wandering out into the city. And I love his mom being like, oh, like, what is he thinking? He should know better. And it's like, Mom, he's got fucking dementia. Like, he can't help himself. And so when they eventually did pick him up, like, Kenny was like, this is my second chance. This is an opportunity. Like, we can make things like, I guess, like, things were a little rocky before, but I think he saw this as an opportunity. Like, no, I'm gonna make things right between me and my dad. Because even his dad talked about it with the nurse about how his real name is, like, was it Fuhin? But coming to America, he wanted to more Americanize himself, so he chose the name Kenny, which isn't too strange, because I think there's a lot of people who do that. Like, I know there are even actors who've done that, who've changed their name just to be more Americanized, just because they're more likely to get roles because of that. I want to say, like, Chloe Bennett's one that immediately comes to my mind. Like, her last name isn't Bennett. It's just, I think that might be her dad's last name or something like that, maybe. I don't remember. I remember she changed her last name just so it'd be easier to get roles, and Hollywood stuff, like intentions and all that side. It doesn't just apply to Hollywood, but I think that's somewhere you see it a lot. But obviously, it's like, yeah, like everyone like change. Yeah, I've heard that story a couple times of people changing their name just for that sake of just like, yeah, especially if you having a name that isn't something wild where you're from, but then like you come to the U.S. and you have one of those names that's like, oh man, like it's one of those. It's unfortunate only here because it's just like, oh, it's one of those names where it's just like, oh, people will poke fun of you at. So it's just kind of like, it's just part of the whole assimilation thing. Regardless, I guess that in itself probably played a little bit of the, led to some tensions and some complications between Kenny and his dad. But yeah, just when Kenny was like, no, this is going to be our chance, like kind of fill in that gap, can make, things could be better going forward. And then they saw the fucking tree on their way back home, and lo and behold, here they are. So it's sad that circumstances played out the way they did, and especially because he was worried about Christy because he was like, I can't find another body. He told the priest, like, I can't find another body. I'm barely hanging on by a thread. And the moment he said, I'm like, you're gonna find another body. And even he, like, knowing like what he said when the time came, it's like, I have to see for myself. I have to be the first one despite everything because it's my dad. And he found his dad ripped to pieces like that. That's heartbreaking. Because for him, it's like, especially because Ellis made that remark about like, well, you wouldn't have to be here at Donna's if you didn't leave down the Spike Strip. It's like, shut up, dude. It was an emergency. Some stuff was going on. Like no one was thinking straight at the time just because so much was going on. But I bet you Kenny's going to blame himself because he's like, right, like maybe, just maybe, if I hadn't gotten that flat tire, if we had gotten back in time, maybe I could have stopped by to check up on my dad or something, could have laid low there with him or whatever. Because obviously he was like more so like, yeah, my mom was probably going to be worried sick, but I don't know. But like him going in the woods and chopping down the tree because he was like, oh, I was going to varnish these chess pieces. But he's like, they're ruined now. They're soaked in blood, And it's just like, damn, dude. Because even like the last keepsakes of his dad, it's like, yeah, it was something that they did together, and now even those are ruined. That's been taken from him as well. You're like, man, it's just one thing after another for Kenny. It's just like, that's rough. Sadly, while other people are dealing with, Kenny dealing with what he lost, luckily Jim, Tabitha, Ethan, and Julie are all together. They are very fortunate because not every family is together. And, it's definitely going to be interesting to see. Now it's daytime and it's like, cool. So at first they were not believing what they were told the previous night, but it's like, so what do we do? Are we going to take it at face value? Especially when when the nurse as well as Kenny's dad and that dude are going to get buried as well. So it's going to be like, yeah, because Jim kept asking like, what if they get in here and Boyd refused to answer that? Jim's probably going to get his answer next episode when it comes to burying those bodies. So it's going to be like, yeah, this is serious. And so question is like, how are they going to process this? How are they going to deal with this? Because they're probably going to go around, talk to people, and find out. Because, well, Tabitha knows like Donna's been here for 3 years, and even Chrissy had talked about it a lot in referencing years' time for her as well. But who knows how long it's actually been for her as well? So I think it's interesting. This show kind of feels like in certain regards is a bit of a slow burn, but I think that slow burn is for the purposes of like building up the tension to make you go like, I don't know, kind of keep you on edge because this is a forever looming threat that nothing can do. Because it's not like Walkers were like, oh, at least you can kill them. It's like, yeah, you might get overwhelmed and stuff. This is something that will break you down psychologically, much like Walkers, but it's like, no, even a more direct way because these things can get inside your head. Because there was that one that came to her, was like, oh, Julie, like, it knows you, like, it can, like, these things kind of, like, they kind of have, like, almost a telepathic, like, thing of, like, oh, their voice, they're basically like sirens because they can get inside your head and just be like, oh, yeah, gunshots won't do anything. It's like, there is no way to actually kill them. It did seem for a quick second we did, like, during Christie's dream, we did see what they look like for a small second, so what their true forms look like, so. Once again, the human forms that they take, I wonder, are those past victims they just skinned and wore their skin? Or is it kind of like a magical thing of like, cool, we just have like a projection filter on that basically makes you a glam, if you're going by Fable standards, of like, yeah, just making it so you can't see us for what we really are. Or like I said, did they just like straight up like they're wearing the skin of all their victims? like I said, so many questions. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where everything ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. I'm excited to find out where all of this will go next. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.